Ever wondered what it's like to study at Cogent University? Let's hear from our student Nick and hear his experience.
All right. So, Nick, thanks so much for joining me today. Really excited to kind of share your story with anybody potentially joining Cogent University or somebody freshly joined to Cogent, just to kind of give a little bit of background about your own journey. All of us have different stories when we're going through this program and outcomes. So it's nice to hear a different perspective. So welcome. And I'm just going to go ahead and kick things off and let you maybe introduce yourself and share a little bit about why you joined Cogent, and ultimately if you'd like to share where you were recently started your new job. Would love to just hear a little bit from you first.
Absolutely. Sure. So, yeah, my name's Nick. I graduated from the University of Akron in May of 2024. My major was in computer programming. I just dropped something. So pretty much in between college and my new job, I signed on with Cogent University, which was definitely a game changer for me. And I think definitely led to me getting recently I was hired as a website technical strategist for KeyBank. And I feel like I learned a lot in the program, and I'm very appreciative that I did it.
Awesome. I'm glad to hear that. So I know that one big question that we get, whether it's somebody like getting ready to start the program, or they've already started it, and maybe it's like you remember doing orientation. There's so many questions about how it's going to go. Can you talk about like how your technical training process actually was, like what your experience was with it, and any tips you have, or like what actually helped you stay on track with the schedule? It's a full-time schedule. There's a lot of different things happening. Just walk us through how that process went for you.
Absolutely, sure. So the process, well, actually, let me start with this. One tip that I would give that definitely helped for me, whether it's you like to do things physically or you're okay with having it stored digitally, I think taking your own notes is going to be very helpful, especially because at least with how the structure is, I found, it would hit Thursday and I would think, oh no, how do I do that thing that I thought I would remember that we learned on Monday? You would be surprised how easy it is to forget something when you're learning so much in a week. So definitely keeping a record. You don't have to do, or I didn't have to at least take notes of every single thing that happened, maybe just a couple steps for a process that isn't super obvious or maybe is more relatively new to you. I found when there were subjects that I was more familiar with, I wasn't taking as much notes for myself because I was already familiar with the concepts. But then when we had concepts that I was not as familiar with, or we were in areas I was a little more unsure of, is when I would write things down more on how do I do these steps. And then eventually it kind of starts to ingrain, but you never know. It's always nice to go back and actually see the process on, oh, how do I do this thing from 2 weeks ago that suddenly become relevant? I think that's kind of the number one tip I would give new people. In terms of how everything worked as a whole, I really enjoyed how it was a lot more project-based. Yes, there's, more lecture type days. That's just going to happen. We have to learn the information somehow. um, but all in all, even those sessions I felt were really helpful for me, because I would have time to absorb and to learn the information. And then the majority of the week being more project based, I actually really enjoyed, because that's how I learn the best, is kind of I get the information and I kind of dive in. And thankfully, that's how Cogent's kind of weekly program works. And that was something I really enjoyed.
Great. Glad to hear that. So overall, let's talk a little bit about the behavioral and the technical prep. So separate from the actual training, and the classes that you're attending, can you talk about the behavioral and technical prep offered, and like what you utilize out of those services, outside of the formal training, like during that 10-week course and then after? Can you talk about any of the services you utilize and maybe which ones you liked the most, or any insight you have there?
Sure, absolutely. So the main two that I really used was the technical interview practice and just the behavioral interview practice. As a developer, fall into the stereotype of I know a lot, but I'm really bad at speaking about it. And I know other people are going to feel that too. So if you do feel that, I would recommend doing both the mock interview sessions. I felt they were super helpful when it comes to little quirks you may have when you're talking, when you're explaining things. I think having another set of eyes on what you're doing and how you're acting can really help. And more towards the technical side of things, I would say that something I didn't expect was it really helped me be able to explain what I know better in ways that kind of make more sense to someone who maybe doesn't understand as much of the details as I would do, or even someone who doesn't understand as much as I would. Kind of being able to change my answer based on what they know, so I'm not going too technical or too generic, so to kind of undermine what I'm saying. I think having interactions that really I can take that kind of takeaway was really important for me.
Okay, great. Love that. Now put yourself in that frame of mind, like you just signed your offer or you're thinking about signing your offer. It's maybe getting to that point where it's your first day of training. So outside of like the note taking with the tech and, attending the mock-ins and all that, like what advice would you give somebody that's actually just entering the training program, like about to actually get started with it? Like think about that mindset. What would you advise?
I would definitely say that the important thing is, well, if it's your first day, take a deep breath. Everything's going to be fine. That was very much for me. I was nervous. I didn't know what to expect. I think at the end of the day, an important thing is, if you're going to sign, is to make sure that this is really the position, like the camp that you want to be in. I think it's a really good camp, but making sure that you know what technologies you know, what technologies you don't know. Really make sure that this camp is great for you, is something I would definitely recommend. But if it's when it was my first day, I knew I was really nervous because I knew kind of the general, like what was going on, what was going to happen. But when it came down to the day to day, that was kind of what I was worrying about more. Um, I can reassure that everything's going to be fine. Um, that it really is that how it breaks down into smaller tasks. It's not as much you are left to your own devices as one may think it might be, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah. Okay, great. I love that. So now entering that stage where you're about to graduate, you're entering that job seeking process, because you've lived this, you've lived in that post-college world too. It's interesting. Some weeks you'll have a lot of interviews and maybe another they'll be very slim or there's a holiday and there's nothing happening and it's just a slow time, right? And you were job seeking in 2024, which was really tough for this kind of early career market. So thinking of how all that went, can you give any advice or what advice would you give to somebody actually starting the job seeking process once they leave our program?
Sure. I would definitely say two of the most important ones that I kind of had to learn during my process was the first one was to try different angles. Um, while it was a tough market and I kept going through the same avenues to find more opportunities, um, I learned that I had a lot more success, whether it was looking for a slightly different name for a job, looking for different outlets to find jobs, things like that. I found were really important because in my experience, I found that I thought a job was under one name, and then I would find that some
Mm-hmm.
companies would have it under something completely different, which was very frustrating, but that's just kind of how it goes. Um,
Yeah.
and I think the second one is to not really let it get to you. When I was going through that kind of period of time, I was kind of thinking like, oh, is there more I need to do? Am I not doing enough? And I think the important thing to remember is it's not an overnight process. Rome wasn't built in a day. It's one of those things where trying different angles, connecting with people who you may know or sort of know, sometimes that also really helps as well.
Great. Love that. And I do have to give you credit there because I don't recall you ever having a moment of panic with me. We absolutely get that. And it's normal human response. Like I know we've all had moments of panic in our life. We can all identify with that. I guess I just mean in this certain instance, I don't recall you panicking. You've always seemed to have faith. And most importantly, you always had an open mind. That is so
Yes.
valuable in this process. It's like something that you literally cannot buy. the value in being able to just having an open mind, and like you said, not just looking at a title and assuming something, and really reading through it and finding more about it. So that's awesome. I'm glad you brought that up, because that's, I feel, is totally true for you. But all right,
Thank
so
you.
I think this is like the last question I have, and then at the end, if there's anything else that you feel that I didn't cover that you want to throw in, or any other advice, feel free to tag it in here at the bottom. But would love to hear from you on this specifically, because as you know, there's people in our cohorts that you train with that have gotten their job strictly through us, right? Like, we've put them with a partner, et cetera. And then some people decide to apply to something on their own, and they secure that job through their own seeking process with, with our support. So I know you have an interesting story. So I'd love to ask you, do you feel the skills that you got from us were helpful for the actual job interview you went on, and then ultimately the job that you secured?
I would definitely say so. I think, yes, the technical information was really helpful. But I think at the same time, too, all of the additional resources like the mock interviews really helped me kind of seal the deal for my interview. And before Cogent, I kind of would get really nervous for interviews, but because I had done so many at this point, I went in, brought my A game, and I was completely relaxed. I'm like, I'm taking command of this call right now.
Good.
So definitely, I would say it was very helpful for sure.
Good. And that's what we want. We want to make you so uncomfortable. And I still remember, do you remember doing the session where we do the role playing in the actual group? That
Oh
one's
my!
always the most uncomfortable for everyone. Abigail and I go in and we're like, okay, today we're doing role playing. And everyone thinks that maybe they can wiggle their way out of it, but everyone has to go.
Yeah, it
If
never
you're
happened.
watching this, if you're watching this, it's your day's coming. But yeah, it's good though, right? Because it's like, just, you're putting yourself out there, and it's just putting you through that process. So that's great. Before I close out the recording, is there anything else I missed, or anything that you wanted to share? No pressure. If you don't, that's okay too. But I just want to make sure I give you the platform to say anything else regarding positive, negative, just anything at all that you want to share.
Sure. Yeah, I would definitely say, kind of just generally speaking, another good a tip of advice I would give is, don't be afraid to ask questions. You're only hurting yourself if you do. And at the same time, if you have or let's say that in a question, maybe the trainer doesn't quite know the answer, or maybe you just need extra information, definitely, I know you're going to be putting in a lot of hours during the day, but sometimes taking that extra time to do a little bit of research by yourself is really going to be a game changer. There were some areas I really needed to do some extra work on my own because maybe I didn't understand something, or I needed more time in a certain environment, something along those lines. And I think definitely just those two things to keep in mind were very helpful for me.
Did you use the LMS for much of that, or like the?
A little bit. Sorry, I
Okay.
didn't interrupt. A little bit
No,
I
no.
did.
Okay.
Sometimes I would go back to check the recordings, and that really helped. But
Got it.
definitely just in general, doing my own
Your own
stuff. Yeah.
research. Good. Yeah, it's always good to check that out. All right, great. Thank you so much, Nick. I really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much.